It was late September when the rain hammered against the windows of the Manhattan District Attorney's office as Imani Brooks stood before the jury, her voice clear and unwavering despite the exhaustion that pulled at her bones. She had been in this courtroom for 6 weeks, building her case against 3 men who represented everything she hated about organized crime. And now, finally, she was closing. "Members of the jury," she said, her dark eyes scanning each face. "For 6 weeks you've heard testimony about violence, about intimidation, about a criminal enterprise that believes it's above the law. The defendants, Anthony Ricci, Michael Russo, and Thomas Benedetto, are not just criminals. They are soldiers in an organization that has terrorized this city for generations. They are enforcers for the Castellano crime family, and the evidence you've seen, the witnesses you've heard, the documents that have been presented, all point to one inescapable conclusion. These men are guilty." Imani was 32 years old and had the kind of presence that made people listen. She stood 5 feet 9 inches tall in her heels, with rich brown skin that glowed even under the harsh courtroom lights, natural hair she wore in an elegant updo that revealed the sharp angles of her face, and a figure that her tailored navy suit displayed professionally but couldn't hide entirely. But it wasn't her appearance that made her formidable. It was her mind. She had graduated top of her class from Columbia Law School, turned down offers from prestigious firms that would have paid her 3 times what the DA's office did, and spent the last 7 years prosecuting some of the most dangerous criminals in New York. She had put away murderers, rapists, and corrupt officials, but taking down members of an organized crime family, that was the pinnacle. That was what she had been working toward her entire career. "The prosecution rests," she said, returning to her seat beside her colleague, Derek Hayes, who gave her a subtle nod of approval. The defense attorney, a slick operator named Richard Thornton, who probably cost more per hour than Imani made in a month, stood to deliver his closing argument, but Imani barely listened. She had him beat, and she knew it. The evidence was overwhelming. 3 witnesses had placed the defendants at the scene of a brutal assault that had left a man paralyzed. Financial records showed payments from Castellano business fronts, and most damning of all, one of the defendants had been caught on a wiretap discussing the attack in detail. The jury deliberated for 2 days. When they came back with guilty verdicts on all counts, Imani felt a surge of satisfaction so intense it was almost physical. She had won. She had taken down 3 soldiers in the Castellano organization, and the message was clear. The law applied to everyone, no matter how powerful their boss was. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed her. Imani gave a brief statement about justice being served and refused to answer questions about whether she would be targeting Alessandro Castellano himself next. But the truth was, she absolutely would be. Taking down his men was just the beginning. What Imani didn't know as she walked back to her office through the rain was that Alessandro Castellano had been in the courtroom that day. He had sat in the back row, dressed in an expensive charcoal suit, watching her every move. And while everyone else saw a defeat for his organization, Alessandro saw something else entirely. He saw the woman who would either destroy him or save him. He just had to figure out which. But Alessandro Castellano was a patient man. He had not built one of the most powerful criminal empires in New York by being impulsive. So he waited, watching from the shadows as Imani celebrated her victory, as she gave interviews about her commitment to taking down organized crime, as she became the face of law and order in a city that desperately wanted to believe justice could win. And while he waited, Alessandro investigated, because something about the case against his men did not sit right with him. The evidence had been too perfect, too neatly packaged. The witnesses had been too prepared, their testimony too rehearsed. And the wiretap recording, the smoking gun that had sealed the conviction, had come from a source that Alessandro's own intelligence network had no record of authorizing. So Alessandro did what he did best. He followed the money. He tracked the movements of everyone involved in the case. And slowly, carefully, he began to uncover something that would change everything. 3 months passed, carrying them into the depths of winter in late December. 3 months during which Imani threw herself into her work with renewed energy, building cases against low-level members of the Castellano organization, gathering evidence for what she hoped would eventually be a RICO case against Alessandro himself. 3 months during which she barely slept, barely ate, barely had a life outside of the office. Derek Hayes, her mentor and the chief of the Major Crimes Division, encouraged her obsession. "You're doing important work, Imani," he told her over late-night coffee in the break room. "Taking down the Castellanos would make your career. Hell, it would make both our careers. Just keep pushing, keep gathering evidence, and we'll bring that whole organization down." Imani trusted Derek completely. He had been the one to recruit her to the DA's office fresh out of law school. He had mentored her, promoted her, given her the high-profile cases that had built her reputation. Derek was more than just a colleague. He was a friend, a father figure, someone whose approval meant everything to her, which was why, on a cold December evening 3 months after the trial, when her assistant Jasmine buzzed her intercom to say that Alessandro Castellano was in the lobby asking to see her, Imani's first instinct was to call Derek. But something made her hesitate. Curiosity, perhaps, or the nagging feeling that had been growing in the back of her mind over the past few weeks, the sense that something about the Castellano case was not quite right. "Send him in," she said instead, "but stay close to the phone." Alessandro Castellano walked into her office like he owned it. He was tall, probably 6 feet 2 inches, with the kind of Mediterranean good looks that belonged in Italian fashion magazines. Dark hair with silver at the temples, sharp cheekbones, olive skin, and eyes so green they looked almost unnatural. He wore a black suit that fit him perfectly, moved with confidence that came from a lifetime of being obeyed, and had an intensity about him that made the air in the room feel charged. "Miss Brooks," he said, his voice deep and tinged with an accent that spoke of old-world Italian heritage. "Thank you for seeing me." "Mr. Castellano," Imani replied, not standing or offering to shake his hand. "You have 5 minutes before I call security. Make it count." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Direct. I appreciate that. I came to offer you 2 things. First, a job. Second, the truth." Imani stared at him. Of all the things she had expected him to say, that was not on the list. "Excuse me?" "The job offer is simple," Alessandro said, taking a seat in the chair across from her desk without being invited. "I need a lawyer. The best lawyer. And you, Miss Brooks, are the best. I am prepared to offer you $5 million a year, plus a percentage of any cases you win for me, plus access to information that could make your career." "I'm a prosecutor," Imani said flatly. "I put people like you in prison. Or did you miss the part where I just sent 3 of your men away for 20 years each?" "I didn't miss it," Alessandro said. His green eyes held hers steadily. "That's exactly why I'm here. You destroyed my organization's operation in under 2 months. You found evidence my own lawyers didn't know existed. You turned witnesses I thought were loyal. You built a case so airtight that even the best defense attorney in New York couldn't crack it. Those are exactly the skills I need." "For what? To help you commit more crimes?" Imani's voice was sharp with contempt. "To help me find the truth," Alessandro said. "But what if I told you that those 3 men are innocent?" The words hung in the air between them. Imani felt her stomach tighten. That's ridiculous. I had witnesses, financial records, a wiretap recording. "All fabricated," Alessandro interrupted. "All planted by someone who wanted my men in prison and was willing to frame them to make it happen." "You're lying," Imani said, but even as she spoke, she felt that nagging doubt grow stronger. Alessandro reached into his jacket pocket, moving slowly so as not to alarm her, and pulled out a manila envelope. He placed it on her desk and slid it across to her. "I am not asking you to take my word for it," he said. "I am asking you to look at the evidence. Real evidence, not the manufactured kind that was presented at trial, and then decide for yourself whether justice was served." Imani stared at the envelope like it might contain a snake. Every instinct she had screamed that this was a trap, a manipulation, an attempt to undermine her victory and free his men. But another part of her, the part that had become a prosecutor because she genuinely believed in truth and justice, wanted to know what was inside. "Why would someone frame your men?" she asked. "What would be the point?" "That," Alessandro said, standing, "is the question I have been trying to answer for 3 months. I have some theories, but I need someone with access to information I cannot obtain. Someone inside the DA's office who can investigate without raising suspicion. Someone brilliant enough to see patterns others would miss, and brave enough to follow the truth wherever it leads." "You want me to investigate my own office?" Imani said slowly. "You want me to betray the people I work with, the system I've dedicated my life to defending?" "I want you to find the truth," Alessandro corrected. "Whether that truth confirms your victory or exposes a conspiracy, I want you to know with absolute certainty that justice was served. Can you honestly say you already have that certainty, Miss Brooks?" The question hit too close to home, because the truth was, Imani had been having doubts. Small things that did not quite add up. Witnesses who seemed too rehearsed. evidence that appeared too convenient, a nagging sense that the case had been too easy, too perfect. "I'll look at your evidence," she said finally, "but that doesn't mean I'm working for you. It means I'm doing my job, which is to seek justice, not just convictions." Alessandro's smile was genuine this time, transforming his face from merely handsome to devastatingly attractive. "That is all I ask. Look at the evidence with an open mind. If you conclude that my men are guilty, I will accept that. But if you find what I believe you will find, then we can discuss what comes next." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "One more thing, Miss Brooks. Be careful who you trust. The person who framed my men had access to police files, DA case files, and the ability to manipulate evidence at the highest levels. That suggests someone with significant power and connections. Someone you probably know and trust." Then he was gone, leaving Imani alone with the envelope and a growing sense of dread. For a long time, she just stared at it. Then, finally, she opened it. Inside were photographs, financial records, and what appeared to be surveillance transcripts. Imani spread them across her desk, her prosecutor's mind automatically organizing them, looking for connections and patterns. The first photograph showed one of the witnesses from the trial, Marcus Williams, meeting with a man Imani did not recognize. According to the notation on the back, the photo had been taken 2 weeks before Williams testified. The second photo showed the same unidentified man meeting with someone Imani did recognize. Derek Hayes, her mentor, her friend. The man she trusted more than almost anyone. Imani's hands shook as she continued through the documents, financial records showing large deposits into Marcus Williams's bank account, made through a series of shell companies. Phone records showing calls between Derek Hayes and all three of the witnesses who had testified against the Castellano men, and most damning of all, a series of emails between Derek and someone with the username Theodore M, discussing the Castellano operation and the need to ensure convictions by any means necessary. Theodore Morrison, the district attorney himself. Imani felt sick. This couldn't be real. It had to be fake, fabricated by Alessandro to discredit her case and free his men. But as she examined the documents more closely, using every technique she had learned in 7 years of prosecuting fraud cases, she could not find any evidence of tampering or fabrication, which meant either Alessandro Castellano had access to incredibly sophisticated forgery capabilities, or the case she had won, the conviction she had celebrated, the justice she thought she had served, was all built on lies. Imani worked through the night, cross-referencing the information in Alessandro's envelope with her own case files. The more she dug, the worse it got. Details that should have been confidential had somehow reached the witnesses. Evidence that had appeared in her case file had come from sources she could not verify. And when she carefully reviewed the wiretap recording that had been the smoking gun in her case, she noticed something she had missed before. The voice identified as Anthony Ricci had a slight speech pattern, a hesitation before certain consonants that did not match Ricci's actual voice on other verified recordings. Someone had created a fake audio file, sophisticated enough to pass initial scrutiny, but not sophisticated enough to withstand the kind of detailed analysis Imani was now performing. By the time the sun rose, Imani had to face a devastating truth. Alessandro Castellano was right. His men were innocent, and she had been used as a weapon to put them in prison by people she trusted. She sat at her desk, staring at the evidence spread before her, feeling the weight of it crush down on her shoulders. 3 innocent men were in prison because of her, because she had been so eager to win, so desperate to prove herself, so blindly trusting of the system she served that she had never questioned whether the evidence was real. Imani had always prided herself on her attention to detail, her ability to spot inconsistencies, her commitment to thorough investigation. But she had failed the most basic test of a prosecutor, to ensure that the person being convicted was actually guilty. The realization was devastating. Everything she had worked for, every case she had won, every conviction she had celebrated, now felt tainted. How many other innocent people had she helped put away? How many other cases had been built on manufactured evidence? How many other lives had been destroyed by the corruption she had been too blind to see? She thought about Anthony Ricci, Michael Russo, and Thomas Benedetto, thought about them waking up in prison cells every morning, separated from their families, their lives destroyed, all because she had believed the lies Derek and Morrison had fed her. The thought made her physically ill. Around 8 in the morning, Imani finally forced herself to shower and change clothes. She looked at herself in the mirror, at the dark circles under her eyes, the tension in her jaw, the exhaustion written across her face. She looked like a woman who had been awake all night confronting the destruction of everything she believed in, because that was exactly what she was. The question was, what was she going to do about it? Imani spent the next week in a state of barely controlled panic. She went to work every day, smiled at Derek, participated in case meetings with Theodore Morrison, and acted like everything was normal, but every moment felt like a betrayal of everything she believed in. She watched Derek give a press conference about the importance of fighting organized crime, talking about how their recent convictions had made the city safer. She watched him accept congratulations from colleagues who praised his dedication to justice. She watched him play the role of the noble prosecutor, all while knowing he was a fraud who had framed innocent men. And the worst part was that she had to pretend she didn't know, had to smile and nod and act like she still believed in him. Because if Derek and Morrison suspected she had discovered the truth, they would move against her. And Imani needed time to figure out her next move. She also continued her investigation, more carefully this time, aware that if Derek and Morrison were willing to frame 3 innocent men, they would not hesitate to come after her if they discovered what she was doing. She accessed old case files, looking for other instances where evidence might have been manufactured. She found 4 more cases in the past 2 years where the evidence had the same too perfect quality, where witnesses had the same rehearsed testimony, where convictions had come too easily. In every case, Derek Hayes had been the lead prosecutor or had significant involvement. And in every case, the defendants had been connected to organized crime families that competed with or threatened the Castellanos. The pattern was clear. Derek and Morrison had been systematically framing members of rival organizations, weakening them while simultaneously building their own reputations as tough-on-crime prosecutors. The convictions brought them political power, media attention, and probably financial rewards from whoever benefited from eliminating the Castellanos' competition. But who was that? Who had the resources and motivation to orchestrate such an elaborate scheme? Imani was still trying to answer that question when Alessandro Castellano called her cell phone. She had never given him her number, which told her everything she needed to know about his information-gathering capabilities. "Have you finished your investigation?" he asked without preamble. "How did you get this number?" Imani demanded. "I have my ways. Answer my question, Miss Brooks. What did you find?" Imani closed her office door and lowered her voice. "You were right, about everything. But I need more information. Who benefits from putting your men in prison? Who has the power to corrupt the DA's office at such a high level?" There was a long pause. Then Alessandro said, "Meet me tonight. 10 o'clock. There is a restaurant in Little Italy called Bella Notte. Come alone and I will tell you everything I know." "I can't just—" "Yes, you can. Because you are no longer just a prosecutor seeking convictions, Miss Brooks. You are a woman seeking truth. And the truth is dangerous enough that you cannot trust anyone in your office with what you have discovered. So either you meet with me and we pool our information, or you continue working in the dark while the people who used you continue to destroy innocent lives." He had a point. As much as Imani hated to admit it, she was out of her depth. She needed help, and the only person offering it was the man she had sworn to destroy. "Fine," she said to him. 10 o'clock. But I'm bringing protection." "Bring whoever you want," Alessandro said. "But bring the evidence you have found as well. All of it. We have a lot to discuss." Bella Notte was exactly the kind of restaurant Imani expected from a man like Alessandro Castellano. Elegant, expensive, with the kind of old-world Italian charm that made you feel like you had stepped back in time. The entrance was marked by a simple brass plaque, the kind that suggested exclusivity rather than advertising it. Inside, warm lighting cast everything in a golden glow, and the scent of fresh basil and garlic filled the air. When Imani arrived at exactly 10 o'clock, wearing jeans and a leather jacket instead of her usual professional attire, the maitre d' immediately escorted her to a private room in the back. The other diners watched her pass with curious eyes, and Imani was acutely aware that she was probably the only black woman in the restaurant. She lifted her chin and met their stares with cool composure, refusing to be intimidated. The private room was intimate, with exposed brick walls, a single table set for 2, and windows that overlooked a small courtyard garden lit by strings of soft lights. Alessandro was already there, sitting at a table set for 2, with wine already poured and the scent of something delicious wafting from covered dishes. He stood when she entered, and Imani was struck again by how imposing he was, how his presence seemed to fill the room. Tonight he wore a dark gray suit with a black shirt open at the collar, no tie, and the casual elegance of the outfit somehow made him even more intimidating than his formal courtroom attire had been. "Miss Brooks," he said, "thank you for coming." "Let's skip the pleasantries," Imani said, taking the seat across from him. She was determined to maintain control of this situation, to remember that this was a business meeting, not a date, regardless of the romantic setting. "I'm here for information, not dinner." "We can do both," Alessandro said, sitting back down. His eyes held hers with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "I took the liberty of ordering. The chef here makes the best ossobuco in the city. He is a friend of mine from Milano, and he only cooks for people I personally approve." "How exclusive," Imani said dryly, though she couldn't help noticing the way Alessandro's eyes crinkled slightly when he smiled. It softened his face, made him look less like a dangerous criminal and more like an extraordinarily attractive man who was currently giving her his complete attention. Despite her determination to remain professional, Imani's stomach growled. She had not eaten all day, too nervous about this meeting. Alessandro's smile widened at the sound. "Eat," he said, lifting the covers from the dishes to reveal perfectly presented veal shanks, creamy risotto, and roasted vegetables that looked like they belonged in a cooking magazine. "We have much to discuss, and you will think better on a full stomach. Besides, it would be an insult to Carlo if we let his masterpiece grow cold." Reluctantly, Imani allowed him to serve her, watching as he moved with practiced ease, portioning food onto her plate with the confidence of someone who was accustomed to taking care of people. The gesture was oddly intimate, domestic in a way that felt at odds with everything she knew about him. The food was, as promised, incredible. The veal was so tender it fell apart at the touch of her fork. The risotto was creamy and rich with undertones of white wine and parmesan, and the vegetables had been roasted to caramelize perfection. For a few minutes they ate in silence, Imani acutely aware of Alessandro watching her with those unsettling green eyes. "You approve?" he asked after a moment. "It's excellent," Imani admitted, taking another bite. "But I didn't come here for a cooking lesson." "No," Alessandro agreed, setting down his fork. "You came here because you suspect Hayes and Morrison are corrupt, and you don't know who you can trust anymore. You came here because you can feel the walls closing in, because you know that once they realize you're investigating them, you'll be in danger. You came here because despite everything you believe about me, about my organization, about the world I represent, you know that I am the only person who can help you." The blunt assessment stung because it was true. Imani set down her own fork and met his gaze. "You said you would tell me everything, so start talking. Who is behind the corruption in the DA's office?" Alessandro leaned back in his chair, and Imani noticed the way the movement made his shoulders strain slightly against the fabric of his jacket. "Focus," she told herself. "This is not the time to be distracted by how well the man wears a suit." "The obvious answer is Theodore Morrison himself," Alessandro said. "He is the district attorney. He has the power and access to orchestrate what you discovered. But Morrison is not clever enough to have designed the scheme. He is a puppet, controlled by someone else." "Who?" "That is what I have been trying to determine for months. Someone with significant financial resources, political connections, and a vested interest in weakening my organization. The most likely candidates are the Volkov family, a Russian crime syndicate that has been trying to expand into New York for years. Or possibly the Moretti family, an old Italian organization that has always resented the Castellano dominance." Alessandro paused to refill their wine glasses, and Imani found herself watching the movement of his hands, noticing how precise and controlled they were. Everything about Alessandro seemed controlled, measured, as if he was always thinking 3 moves ahead. "But you're not sure," Imani said. "I am not sure," Alessandro admitted, and there was frustration in his voice. "Which is why I need you. You have access to DA files, to evidence, to information about other cases that might reveal the pattern. Together we can identify who is behind this and stop them." "And then what? You want revenge? You want to start a war with whoever framed your men?" Alessandro's expression was unreadable. "I want justice. The same thing you want, Miss Brooks. I want the people who did this held accountable. I want my men freed. And I want to ensure that this never happens again." "You're a criminal," Imani said bluntly. "Why should I believe you care about justice?" For the first time since she had met him, Alessandro looked genuinely offended. He set down his wineglass with enough force that the crystal rang against the table. "I am many things, Miss Brooks. A businessman, both legitimate and otherwise. A son of a family with a complicated history. A man who has made choices I am not always proud of. But I'm not a liar. When I give my word, I keep it. And I give you my word now that I want the truth exposed, regardless of the consequences to me or my organization." There was passion in his voice, intensity that surprised Imani. She had expected him to be cold, calculating, to view this entire situation as just another business transaction. But the emotion in his eyes was real, and it made her wonder if maybe she had misjudged him. "Why do you care so much?" she asked quietly. "Your organization has weathered losses before. 3 men going to prison, even wrongfully, shouldn't be enough to provoke this level of response. So why? Why are you willing to risk exposing yourself to work with a prosecutor who has dedicated her career to destroying people like you?" Alessandro was quiet for a long moment, studying her face as if trying to decide how much to reveal. Finally, he said, "Anthony Ricci has a daughter. She is 7 years old, and her name is Isabella. When her father was convicted, she asked me if he would be home for her birthday. I had to tell her no. I had to watch this little girl cry because her father was being taken away for something he did not do." He paused, and Imani saw something in his eyes that looked like pain. Michael Russo's wife was pregnant when he was sent to prison. She gave birth to their son 3 months ago. Michael has never held his child. And Thomas Benedetto's mother, she had a stroke 2 weeks after the conviction. The stress of seeing her son wrongly imprisoned, of knowing she might die before he was freed, it was too much for her. She is still alive, but barely, and every day that passes is another day Thomas cannot say goodbye if the worst happens. Imani felt tears prick her eyes. She had known intellectually that the men she convicted had families, but she had never allowed herself to think about them, to consider the human cost of her victories. It was easier to see defendants as criminals, as enemies of society, than as fathers and sons and husbands. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "You were used," Alessandro said, his voice gentler now. "You believed you were serving justice, but the people who framed my men, they knew exactly what they were doing. They knew innocent people would suffer, and they did it anyway, for money and power. That is the real crime, Miss Brooks. Not what my organization does, which is at least honest in its dishonesty, but what your colleagues did. They corrupted the very system meant to protect people." Imani studied his face, looking for any sign of deception, but all she saw was sincerity and something else, something that looked almost like respect. "I found 4 other cases," she said slowly, "all with the same pattern, all involving defendants connected to your competitors. Derek Hayes was involved in all of them, and I believe Theodore Morrison knew about them as well." Alessandro nodded. "That matches what my own investigation uncovered. But I found something else, something you would not have access to. Financial records showing that Theodore Morrison has been receiving monthly payments of $50,000 from a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands." $50,000 a month? Imani's eyes widened. "That's $600,000 a year." "For the past 3 years," Alessandro confirmed, "which totals $1.8 million. That is a lot of money for a public servant to be receiving from an unknown source." "Can you trace the shell company?" Imani asked. "I am working on it. But these things take time, and the people behind it have been very careful to cover their tracks. What I need from you is access to Morrison's case files, his calendar, his communications, anything that might tell us who he is meeting with, who he is taking orders from." Imani shook her head. "I can't just break into the DA's office and steal files. That's illegal. It would end my career and probably land me in prison." "And continuing to work for people who are framing innocent men?" Alessandro asked quietly. "How does that align with your principles, Miss Brooks?" The question hit home. Because he was right. How could she continue to work in the DA's office knowing what she knew? How could she prosecute people for crimes while her own colleagues were manufacturing evidence and destroying lives? "I need time to think," Imani said. It's too much. I can't just throw away my entire career, my reputation, everything I have worked for." "I understand," Alessandro said, and he sounded sincere. "But while you are thinking, innocent men are sitting in prison. Men who have families, children who ask when their fathers are coming home, men whose lives are being destroyed by a corrupt system. How much time do they have, Miss Brooks?" Imani felt tears prick her eyes, which made her angry. She did not cry. She was strong, composed, in control, but the weight of what she had discovered, the betrayal by people she trusted, the impossible choice in front of her, it was too much. I need to leave, she said, standing abruptly. Thank you for dinner and for the information. I'll contact you when I have decided what to do. Alessandro stood as well. Before you go, there is one more thing you should know. What? Derek Hayes called a meeting with Morrison this afternoon. I have a source in the DA's office who overheard part of their conversation. They were discussing you, Miss Brooks. Specifically, whether you could be trusted, whether you were becoming a liability. Imani felt ice flood her veins. What does that mean? It means they may suspect that you are investigating them. It means you may be in danger. It means that the decision you need to make may need to be made sooner than you thought. Alessandro closed the distance between them and took her hand, his grip warm and strong. I can protect you, Imani. If you agree to work with me, I can keep you safe from whatever Morrison and Hayes are planning. But you need to decide. Tonight. Because if they move against you, I may not be able to help you in time. Imani looked down at their joined hands, at the contrast between her dark brown skin and his olive complexion, and felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Trust the system she had dedicated her life to, or trust the criminal offering her protection. It should have been an easy choice, but nothing about this situation was easy. I need to go home and think, she said, pulling her hand free. I'll call you tomorrow with my decision. Tomorrow may be too late, Alessandro warned. Then I guess we'll find out, Imani said, and walked out of the restaurant before he could say anything else. She drove home in a daze, her mind racing with everything Alessandro had told her. The families destroyed by the wrongful convictions. The corruption that ran deeper than she had imagined. The choice she was going to have to make between the career she had built and the truth she had uncovered. When she pulled into her parking garage, she sat in her car for a long moment trying to organize her thoughts, trying to figure out what to do. The garage was mostly empty at this hour, just a few scattered cars belonging to her neighbors. The fluorescent lights cast everything in a sickly yellow glow, and somewhere in the distance she could hear the drip of water from a leaking pipe. That was when she noticed the black SUV parked 3 spaces over, its engine running, exhaust creating small clouds in the cold night air. The same black SUV that had been parked outside Bella Note when she arrived. The same black SUV that she now realized with growing horror had been parked near her office for the past week. They had been watching her, following her, waiting for the right moment to confront her. Imani's heart began to pound. She fumbled for her phone, intending to call 911, when her passenger door opened with a sharp click that made her jump. A man slid into the seat beside her with practiced ease, and Imani's blood turned to ice when she saw who it was. Derek Hayes. Hello, Imani, he said, and there was something in his voice she had never heard before, something cold and dangerous that made every instinct she had scream at her to run. We need to talk about what you've been doing with your time lately. Imani's hand tightened on her phone, but Derek noticed the movement. With a speed that surprised her, he reached over and plucked the phone from her grip, then powered it down and slipped it into his pocket. Now, he said, settling back into the seat with an almost casual air, we can have a civilized conversation without interruptions. Derek, what are you doing in my car? Imani managed to say, though her voice came out shakier than she wanted. How did you even get into a locked car? Derek smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. Imani, you've been working with criminals for 7 years. Did you really think I don't have access to the same tools they use? A Slim Jim takes less than 30 seconds to open most car doors. He pulled out a slim metal tool from his coat pocket and held it up as if to prove his point, then tucked it away again. The gesture was casual, almost friendly, but there was nothing friendly about the look in his eyes. Answer my question, Derek said, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. Have you been investigating me? Have you been meeting with Alessandro Castellano? Imani's mind raced. She could lie, claim that Alessandro had approached her, and she had immediately reported it. But Derek had been following her. He had seen her at Bella Notte, probably knew exactly how long she had stayed, might even have surveillance of her going to one of the Castellano properties for the initial meeting. There was no point in lying. If Derek was here, if he had been following her, then he already knew. Yes, she said, lifting her chin defiantly even as fear twisted in her gut. I have been. Because I discovered that the case against the Castellano men was fabricated. Because I realized that you and Morrison have been framing innocent people. Derek sighed, and for a moment he looked almost disappointed, like a teacher whose star pupil had failed an important test. I was afraid of that. You're too smart for your own good, Imani. I told Morrison we should never have given you that case, but he insisted. He thought your success would give us credibility, make the whole operation look more legitimate. I warned him you might dig too deep, might start asking questions, but he wouldn't listen. Why? Imani demanded, anger cutting through her fear. Why would you do this? You taught me to believe in justice and truth. You were the one who recruited me straight out of law school, who told me that being a prosecutor was about more than just winning cases. It was about protecting people. How could you throw all of that away? Derek's expression hardened. Justice? He laughed, and it was not a pleasant sound. Imani, justice is a fairy tale we tell ourselves to sleep better at night. The real world runs on power and money, and the people who understand that truth are the ones who thrive. Morrison and I, we recognized that truth years ago, and we have been using it to build something bigger than you can imagine. You've been destroying innocent lives, Imani shot back. You sent 3 men to prison for crimes they didn't commit. 3 fathers, husbands, sons, and for what? Money? Political power? For both, Derek said calmly, and for the satisfaction of knowing that we control the system everyone else thinks controls them. Do you have any idea how much power that gives us? How many politicians, business leaders, even other prosecutors owe their positions to the work Morrison and I have done? We've built an empire, Imani, and you could have been part of it. You still can be. Imani stared at him in horror. You're insane if you think I would ever... Think carefully before you finish that sentence, Derek interrupted, and now there was steel in his voice. Because right now, you're at a crossroads. You can make the smart choice, or you can make the choice that gets you killed. The threat hung in the air between them, as clear as if Derek had pulled a gun. Imani felt her throat tighten, felt the full weight of the danger she was in settle over her, like a suffocating blanket. Who are you working for? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Who is paying Morrison? That's not your concern, Derek said. What is your concern is what happens next. You have 2 choices, Imani. You can forget everything you discovered, return to your job, and continue prosecuting cases as if nothing happened. If you do that, you'll have a long and successful career. Morrison has already promised me that when I retire next year, he'll recommend you to take over as chief of major crimes. You could be running this division before you're 40. Think about that. Think about all the good you could do with that kind of power. Good? Imani's voice rose despite her fear. You're talking about good while threatening to kill me if I don't agree to cover up your crimes? I'm talking about reality, Derek said. Yes, we framed the Castellano men. But they're criminals, Imani. Maybe they didn't commit the specific crime we convicted them for, but they've committed plenty of others. They're not innocent just because this particular case was manufactured. And by putting them away, we've made the city safer. We've weakened a major criminal organization. Doesn't that count for something? No, Imani said flatly. It doesn't. Because the moment you start deciding that the ends justify the means, that the law can be bent for the right reasons, you become worse than the criminals you're supposedly fighting. You become the thing you're supposed to protect people from. Derek's expression darkened. You always were idealistic. I used to find it charming. Now I just find it naive. He reached into his jacket and Imani's heart stopped, certain he was reaching for a weapon. But instead he pulled out a business card and placed it on the dashboard. This is a burner phone number, he said. You have until tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. exactly, to call this number and tell me that you're going to forget everything you discovered and get back in line. If you make that call, all of this goes away. We continue as if nothing happened. You get your promotion, Morrison gets his re-election, and everyone wins. And if I don't? Imani asked, though she already knew the answer. Derek's smile was cold. Then you become a liability. And liabilities have a way of disappearing in this city. Traffic accidents, muggings gone wrong, suicides brought on by the stress of the job. It would be tragic, but these things happen, especially to young prosecutors who work too hard and burn themselves out. He reached over and patted her hand in a gesture that would have looked almost fatherly if not for the threat underlying it. For what it's worth, I genuinely like you, Imani. You're brilliant, dedicated, and you have a real gift for this work. I hope you make the smart choice. I really do. Because I would hate to have to order your death. The casual way he said it, as if ordering her murder was just another item on his to-do list, made Imani's blood run cold. Derek opened the car door and got out, then leaned back in one more time. 8 a.m. tomorrow, Imani. Don't be late, and don't try to run. We have people everywhere. The police, the FBI, even the federal prosecutors. There's nowhere you can go that we won't find you." Derek pulled her phone from his pocket and tossed it onto the passenger seat. "No games, Imani. I want you scared, not dead tonight. You need that phone to call me in the morning with the right answer." Then he was gone, walking back to the black SUV with the same casual confidence he always had, as if he hadn't just threatened her life. The SUV pulled away, its taillights disappearing into the night, leaving Imani sitting alone in her car, shaking with rage and fear and the devastating realization that she was completely alone. Except she wasn't alone. Not completely. With trembling fingers, Imani grabbed her phone from where Derek had thrown it and pulled up Alessandro's number and pressed call. He answered on the first ring. "Miss Brooks?" "They know," Imani said, her voice breaking. "Derek Hayes just threatened me. He said I have until tomorrow morning to agree to keep quiet about the corruption or they'll kill me." There was a moment of silence. Then Alessandro said in a voice that was deadly calm, "Where are you right now?" "My parking garage. I just got home." "Stay in your car. Lock the doors. Do not go into your apartment. I am sending my men to get you right now. They will be there in 5 minutes. Alessandro." 5 minutes, Imani. Stay on the phone with me until they arrive. You are going to be safe. I promise you that." And despite everything, despite the impossibility of the situation, Imani believed him. The next 3 hours passed in a blur. Alessandro's men, led by a quiet, efficient man named Luca, who introduced himself as head of security, collected Imani from her parking garage and drove her to what they described as a safe house in Brooklyn. The drive took 40 minutes, winding through the city streets with practiced ease, making turns that seemed random, but that Imani suspected were designed to lose any potential followers. Luca sat in the front passenger seat, constantly scanning the mirrors, while 2 other men flanked Imani in the back. They were polite but alert, professional in a way that suggested military training. It was actually a beautifully restored brownstone in Park Slope, tucked onto a quiet tree-lined street that looked nothing like what Imani had imagined when she heard the words safe house. One of several properties the Castellano family owned throughout the city, this one had been converted for exactly this purpose, protecting people who needed to disappear for a while. The exterior was classic Brooklyn, with original stonework and a small front garden. Inside was even more surprising. High ceilings with original molding, hardwood floors that gleamed in the soft lighting, and furniture that was both expensive and comfortable. The place was staffed by people who treated Imani with respectful deference. A woman named Maria, who appeared to be in her 60s and had kind eyes, showed Imani to a second-floor bedroom and offered to make her tea. A younger man, introduced only as Carlo, took up position in the hallway outside her door. "Mr. Castellano will be here soon," Maria said in a soft Italian accent. "He asked me to make sure you have everything you need. Are you hungry? Thirsty? Do you need anything to help you sleep?" Imani shook her head, still too shocked to process everything that had happened. "No, thank you. I just need a moment." Maria nodded sympathetically and left, closing the door quietly behind her. Alone in the beautiful bedroom with its plush bed and expensive linens, Imani finally allowed herself to fall apart. She sat on the edge of the bed and buried her face in her hands, letting the tears come. Everything she had built, everything she had worked for, was crumbling around her. Her career was over. Her mentor had threatened to kill her. The justice system she had believed in was corrupted from the inside, and she was now hiding in a safe house owned by a mafia boss because he was literally the only person in the city she could trust. How had her life become this impossible? She had no idea how long she sat there crying, but eventually she heard voices downstairs, the sound of the front door opening and closing, footsteps on the stairs. She quickly wiped her eyes, not wanting anyone to see her crying, and stood just as there was a soft knock on her bedroom door. "Imani, it's Alessandro. May I come in?" She opened the door to find Alessandro standing in the hallway, still in the gray suit he had worn to dinner, though he had loosened his tie and rolled up his shirt sleeves. Despite the late hour, he looked alert and focused, though there was concern in his green eyes when he saw her face. "You've been crying," he said softly. "I'm fine," Imani lied. Alessandro's expression said he didn't believe her, but he didn't press. Instead, he gestured toward the stairs. "Come downstairs. I've asked Maria to make coffee, and we need to talk about what happens next." Imani followed him down to a comfortable living room where a fire crackled in the fireplace. Maria had indeed made coffee, along with a selection of pastries that sat on a side table. Alessandro poured Imani a cup, adding cream and sugar without asking, somehow knowing exactly how she took it, The gesture was small, but it surprised her. How did you know how I take my coffee? Alessandro smiled slightly. I make it my business to know things, including the fact that you drink exactly 3 cups every morning at your office, always with cream and 2 sugars, and that you're particular about the temperature, preferring it hot enough to be slightly uncomfortable, but not so hot that it burns your tongue. Imani didn't know whether to be impressed or disturbed by how much he knew about her habits. You've been watching me. I've been protecting you, Alessandro corrected, settling into the chair across from her. From the moment you convicted my men, I knew you would be valuable, either as an enemy to be neutralized or as an ally to be cultivated. So yes, I have been watching you, learning about you, understanding what drives you, what matters to you, what makes you the brilliant prosecutor you are. That's creepy, Imani said, but there was no real anger in her voice. She was too tired, too overwhelmed to work up proper indignation. That's survival, Alessandro replied. In my world, Miss Brooks, information is power. The more I know about the people around me, the better I can predict their actions, protect my interests, and yes, protect people who might need my help, which now includes you. He leaned forward slightly, his elbows on his knees, his eyes never leaving her face. Derek Hayes and Theodore Morrison are dangerous men. They have resources, connections, and the willingness to kill anyone who threatens their operation. Right now, you are the biggest threat they face, which means you need protection that goes beyond just a safe house. What are you proposing? Imani asked. We accelerate our timeline, Alessandro said. Derek gave you until 8 a.m. tomorrow to agree to keep quiet about the corruption. We don't give him that opportunity to take action against you. Instead, we move tonight. We take everything you have discovered and everything I have uncovered, and we expose them before they can hurt you. How? Imani set down her coffee cup. We can't just go to the police. Derek said they have people everywhere, even in the FBI. Who can we trust with this information? The media, Alessandro said. Public exposure. Once the story's out in the open, Morrison and Hayes won't be able to silence you without drawing even more attention to themselves. The federal government will have no choice but to investigate, and once that happens, all their connections and resources won't be able to protect them. Imani nodded slowly. It made sense. Do you have contacts in the media? Journalists who would be willing to run this story? I have several, Alessandro confirmed, but I want you to choose who we approach. This is your story, your investigation. You should have control over how it's told. The trust inherent in that statement surprised Imani. Alessandro Castellano, a man who built his empire on control and careful management of information, was offering to let her make the decision about how to proceed. It was a gesture of respect that felt significant. There's a reporter at the New York Times, Imani said slowly. Sarah Chen. She specializes in investigating corruption and government misconduct. I've read her work, and she's fearless. If anyone would be willing to run this story, it would be her. Then we contact Sarah Chen first thing in the morning, Alessandro said. I'll have Luca arrange a meeting at a neutral location, somewhere Morrison and Hayes won't be watching. We'll give her everything, walk her through the evidence, answer all her questions, and then we let her do what she does best. Alessandro stood and crossed to the fireplace, staring into the flames with an expression that Imani couldn't quite read. In the flickering light, he looked less like a dangerous criminal and more like a man carrying the weight of difficult decisions. I want you to know something, he said without turning around. What I told you at dinner about wanting justice, about wanting to free my men, that was all true, but it wasn't the complete truth. Imani felt her pulse quicken. What do you mean? Alessandro turned to face her, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. I have been watching you for months, Imani. Learning about you, yes, but also, I have been impressed by you. By your dedication, your intelligence, your refusal to compromise your principles, even when it would have been easier. You convicted my men, damaged my organization, and became one of the biggest threats I faced. And instead of hating you for it, I found myself respecting you. He took a step closer, and Imani found herself unable to look away from his gaze. When I offered you a job that first day in your office, I told myself it was purely strategic, that I needed your legal mind, your prosecutor's skills. But the truth is, I wanted you around. I wanted to talk to you, to match wits with you, to see what would happen when we were on the same side instead of opposite sides. Alessandro, Imani started, but he held up a hand. Let me finish. You need to understand the full picture before you decide whether to trust me. Because yes, I want to expose Morrison and Hayes. Yes, I want to free my men. But I also want you, Imani Brooks. I want your brilliant mind working alongside mine. I want to see what we could accomplish together. And God help me, I want to know if this thing between us, this attraction, this connection, is as real as it feels, or if I'm just projecting what I want to see. Imani stood slowly, her heart pounding so hard she was certain Alessandro could hear it. Everything he was saying was impossible. Insane. She should be horrified by his confession, should be maintaining professional distance, should be remembering that he was a criminal and she was a prosecutor, even if she was currently a prosecutor in hiding. But instead, all she could think about was how close he was standing, how the firelight made his eyes look even more impossibly green, how much she wanted to close the distance between them and see what would happen. "This is crazy," she said, but her voice came out breathless rather than firm. "Completely," Alessandro agreed, "but that doesn't make it any less real." They stood there barely 2 feet apart, the air between them charged with tension and possibility. Imani knew she should step back, should maintain distance, should remember all the very good reasons why getting involved with Alessandro Castellano was a terrible idea, but she had spent her entire adult life being careful, being professional, making the smart choice. And where had that gotten her? Betrayed by her mentor, threatened with death, hiding in a safe house because the system she trusted had turned against her. Maybe it was time to stop being careful. Maybe it was time to trust her instincts instead of her logic. And her instincts were screaming that Alessandro Castellano was dangerous and complicated, and absolutely not the kind of man she should get involved with, but also that he was honest in a way no one else in her life had been lately, and that the attraction between them was very, very real. "We should focus on the investigation," she said, but she didn't step back. "We should," Alessandro agreed, but he didn't step back either. "This is a terrible idea. The worst. I barely know you." "Then let's fix that." Alessandro reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture so gentle and unexpectedly intimate that it made Imani shiver. "Ask me anything you want to know. I'll give you complete honesty, which is more than most people in your life have offered lately." Imani took a shaky breath. "Are you a good man?" Alessandro considered the question seriously. "I don't know. I've done things I'm not proud of. Hurt people who probably didn't deserve it. Built an empire on activities that are, at best, morally gray. But I've also protected people who needed protection, been loyal to those who showed me loyalty, and tried to operate by a code even when that code wasn't exactly legal. Does that make me good? Probably not. But it makes me honest about what I am." "That's not exactly reassuring," Imani said. "I'm not trying to reassure you," Alessandro said. "I'm trying to be truthful. Because if we're going to do this, if we're going to work together, if we're going to whatever this is between us, it needs to be built on honesty. No more lies, no more manipulation. Just the truth, however complicated it might be." Imani looked up at him, at this man who should be her enemy, and realized that somewhere between him walking into her office with an impossible offer and this moment standing in front of a fireplace in a Brooklyn safe house, he had become something else entirely. He had become the only person she trusted. They spent the next 2 days preparing. Imani organized all the evidence she had gathered, creating a comprehensive timeline of the corruption. Alessandro provided his own evidence, including the financial records showing Morrison's payments and surveillance footage of Derek meeting with various witnesses. The work was meticulous and exhausting. Imani cross-referenced dates, verified sources, and built a narrative that would be impossible to refute. Alessandro brought in his own investigators, men who moved through the shadows of the city gathering additional proof. They discovered bank records, wiretap logs, and even testimony from other prosecutors who had noticed irregularities but had been too afraid to speak up. By the time they were ready to approach a journalist, they had built a case so comprehensive that it filled 3 bankers' boxes with documents and a flash drive with hours of recorded evidence. Then they contacted Sarah Chen, an investigative journalist with the New York Times, who had a reputation for taking on powerful institutions. Sarah had broken stories about police corruption, political bribes, and corporate malfeasance. If anyone would have the courage and credibility to run this story, it would be her. The meeting took place at a neutral location, a conference room in a hotel in Midtown that Alessandro had rented under a false name. Sarah arrived alone as they had requested, her recorder and notebook ready, her expression professionally skeptical. Sarah was in her early 40s, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who had seen every trick in the book. She looked at Alessandro with barely concealed suspicion and at Imani with curiosity. "Before we start," Sarah said, settling into her chair, "I need to understand why you're coming to me. Mr. Castellano, you're a known figure in organized crime. Miss Brooks, you're a prosecutor with an impeccable record. This partnership doesn't make sense unless there's something extraordinary happening." "There is," Imani said. She pushed the first box across the table. "I've discovered evidence that the DA's office has been systematically manufacturing evidence to frame innocent people. The corruption goes all the way to the top, including District Attorney Theodore Morrison and Chief of Major Crimes Derek Hayes." Sarah's eyebrows rose. "Those are serious allegations. You have proof?" "Box is full of it," Alessandro said. "Financial records, witness statements, audio recordings. Everything you need to verify that what we're telling you is true." For the next 3 hours, they walked Sarah through the evidence. Imani explained how she had discovered the fabricated evidence in the Castellano case, how she had traced the pattern through other cases, how Derek had threatened her life when she got too close to the truth. Alessandro provided context about who benefited from the convictions, about Victor Volkov's attempts to take control of New York's criminal underworld, about the money flowing into Morrison's accounts. Sarah was skeptical at first, understandably wary of a story being pushed by a known Mafia boss. But when she saw the evidence, when she heard Imani's first-hand account of what she had discovered, when she verified the authenticity of the financial documents and listened to the recordings, Sarah's professional instincts took over. "This is bigger than just Morrison and Hayes," Sarah said, spreading the documents across her desk. "This implicates the entire DA's office, possibly members of the police department, maybe even judges. If even half of this is true, it's the biggest corruption scandal in New York history." "It's all true," Imani said firmly. "I verified every piece of evidence myself, and I'm willing to go on the record about what I found." Sarah looked at Imani with new respect. "You understand what this means for you, right? You're not just ending your career in the DA's office. You're making yourself a target for every corrupt official in the city. Your life is going to change dramatically." "It already has," Imani said, glancing at Alessandro, who stood by the window with his arms crossed. "I'm ready for whatever comes next." Sarah's article ran on the front page of the New York Times 3 days later. The headline read, "Prosecutor exposes widespread corruption in Manhattan DA's office." The story detailed everything: the fabricated evidence, the framed defendants, the payments to Morrison, Derek's role in orchestrating the scheme, and it named names. The reaction was immediate and explosive. By noon, the FBI had announced an investigation into the DA's office. The case was handed to a federal task force from Washington, not the local field office where Derek's contacts might have provided warning. Derek had exaggerated their reach, it turned out. They had a few compromised officials, not the complete control he had claimed. By evening, Theodore Morrison had been placed on administrative leave, and by the next morning, Derek Hayes had been arrested, caught trying to flee the country with 2 suitcases full of cash. Imani watched the news coverage from the safe house, where she had been staying for her own protection. Seeing Derek in handcuffs, being led into federal custody, should have felt like victory, but mostly she just felt sad. Sad for the man he could have been, for the mentor she thought she had, for the justice system she had believed in. Alessandro came to stand beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You did the right thing," he said quietly. "I know," Imani replied, "but that doesn't make it easier." Over the next few weeks, the full extent of the corruption was revealed. The investigation uncovered not just Morrison and Hayes, but a network of corrupt officials that extended throughout the city's justice system. Judges who had accepted bribes to rule in favor of certain outcomes, police officers who had planted evidence, lawyers who had knowingly presented false testimony, and at the center of it all was a name Imani had suspected but couldn't prove: Victor Volkov, head of the Russian crime syndicate that had been trying to expand into New York for years. Volkov had been paying Morrison and his network to systematically take down his competition, weakening rival organizations while positioning himself to take control of the city's criminal underworld. Anthony Ricci, Michael Russo, and Thomas Benedetto were released from prison 2 months after Sarah's article was published. Imani met them the day they walked free, outside the gates of the correctional facility where they had spent 8 agonizing months for crimes they didn't commit. It was a cold morning in early spring, the kind of day where the sun struggled to break through gray clouds. Imani stood by Alessandro's car, her hands shoved in her coat pockets, watching as the three men emerged from the prison with their personal belongings in plastic bags. They looked older than they should have, harder, with the kind of weariness that came from being caged unjustly. Anthony Ricci saw her first. He was a big man, probably in his late 30s, with dark hair and the kind of weathered face that suggested he had seen too much of life's darker side. For a moment, he just stared at her, and Imani braced herself for anger, for accusations, for the hatred she deserved. Instead, he walked over and extended his hand. "Miss Brooks," Anthony Ricci said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "Alessandro told us what you did, how you risked everything to expose the truth. We don't blame you for what happened. You were used, just like we were." Imani took his hand, feeling the rough calluses on his palm. "I should have seen it," she said, her voice thick with emotion she was trying to control. "I should have questioned the evidence more carefully. I should have been better." "You did the best you could with the information you had," Michael Russo said, coming to stand beside Anthony. Michael was younger, maybe 30, with kind eyes that seemed at odds with his role in the Castellano organization. "And when you discovered the truth, you didn't hide from it. You faced it. That takes courage. More courage than most people have." Thomas Benedetto, the quietest of the three, nodded in agreement. "My mother," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "She's still alive. I got to see her yesterday, got to tell her I'm free. If you hadn't fought for us, I might have been in there when she passed. You gave me back my family, Miss Brooks. That means everything." Their forgiveness should have made Imani feel better, but it didn't. Because the truth was, 3 men had spent 8 months in prison because she had been too eager for a win, too confident in her own righteousness, too trusting of the people around her. 8 months they would never get back. 8 months of their children growing up without fathers, their wives struggling alone, their mothers worrying themselves sick. It was a lesson she would never forget. As for her own future, Imani faced a choice. She could try to rebuild her career in the justice system, perhaps working for the federal government or a different DA's office. But the thought of going back, of working within a system she now knew could be so easily corrupted, held no appeal. Instead, she did something she never thought she would do. She accepted Alessandro's original offer. She became his lawyer, but with conditions. She would only work on legitimate business matters. She would not help him with anything illegal, and she would maintain her independence with her own office and her own clients outside of the Castellano organization. Alessandro agreed to all of it without hesitation. "I told you from the beginning," he said. "I want your brilliant mind working for me, not your soul. You keep your principles, Imani Brooks. They are what make you valuable." By early summer, 6 months after Theodore Morrison was arrested, Imani sat in her new office on the 10th floor of one of Alessandro's legitimate business buildings, reviewing contracts for a real estate development. Her practice, Brooks Legal Services, was thriving. She represented small business owners, activists, and people who couldn't afford traditional representation. She also worked as general counsel for the Castellano family businesses, helping Alessandro transition his operations away from criminal activities and toward legitimate enterprises. It was challenging work, navigating the complex legal landscape while also dealing with resistance from old guard members of the family who didn't want to change. But slowly, carefully, they were making progress. There was a knock on her office door, and Alessandro walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee. He set one on her desk and leaned down to kiss her. The kiss still surprised Imani sometimes. Not because it was unwelcome. She had discovered over the past months that Alessandro Castellano was one of the most interesting, intelligent, and surprisingly honorable men she had ever met. But because 6 months ago she would have said that the idea of her being in a relationship with a mafia boss was not just unlikely but impossible. Yet here they were. "How's the contract review going?" Alessandro asked. "Slowly," Imani admitted. "But I think we can make this development work, as long as you're serious about using union labor and paying fair wages." "I'm serious," Alessandro said. "You've convinced me that building a legitimate empire is more sustainable than building one on fear and violence. It's also more profitable in the long run." "I'm a very persuasive lawyer," Imani said with a smile. "You're a brilliant lawyer," Alessandro corrected. "And I'm lucky to have you, both as my legal counsel and as the woman I love." The word still made Imani's breath catch. Love. They had said it to each other for the first time 3 weeks ago, after a long evening spent reviewing evidence for the ongoing federal investigation into Viktor Volkov. It had been spontaneous, unplanned, and completely genuine. Imani stood and walked around her desk to wrap her arms around him. 6 months ago, she never would have imagined being here, in this moment, with this man, but life had surprised her in ways she couldn't have predicted. "I love you," she said, "even though you're still technically a criminal." "Technically," Alessandro agreed with a smile, "but I'm working on it. With your help, I'm becoming something better." "We're both becoming something better," Imani said, together. And as they stood there in her office, holding each other, both of them could feel the truth of those words. They were both changing, growing, becoming more than they had been before. Because sometimes love does that. It challenges you and changes you and makes you want to be worthy of the person you're with. The federal investigation into Viktor Volkov concluded 8 months after Sarah Chen's article was published. Volkov was arrested, along with 37 members of his organization, and charged with racketeering, murder, and conspiracy to corrupt public officials. Theodore Morrison and Derek Hayes both pled guilty to their roles in the scheme, agreeing to testify against Volkov in exchange for reduced sentences. Imani attended Morrison's sentencing hearing. She sat in the back of the courtroom, watching as the man who had once been one of the most powerful figures in New York's justice system stood before the judge, looking small and defeated. Alessandro sat beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. Over the past 8 months, he had become her partner in more ways than one. They worked together on reforming his organization, on building her legal practice, on navigating the complex aftermath of the corruption scandal. And somewhere along the way, their professional partnership had become something more. It had started slowly. Late nights working on cases where conversation drifted from business to personal. Dinners that began as strategy sessions and ended with them talking about everything except work. Then 3 months after the scandal broke, after he had taken her to dinner at a small Italian restaurant and walked her home, he had asked permission before kissing her. That simple gesture of respect, of giving her choice, had meant everything. Now, 8 months after that first kiss, Imani sat beside Alessandro in a federal courtroom and watched her former boss being sentenced to 20 years in prison. And she realized that the journey from prosecutor to mafia lawyer to Alessandro's partner had been impossible and terrifying, and absolutely worth it. "Theodore Morrison," the judge said, "you were entrusted with one of the most important responsibilities in our society, to seek justice on behalf of the people. Instead, you corrupted that responsibility for personal gain. You framed innocent men. You destroyed lives. You betrayed every principle you swore to uphold. For these crimes, I sentence you to 20 years in federal prison." 20 years. The same sentence Imani had won for the 3 innocent men Morrison had helped frame. There was a poetry to that, a sense of justice that would have satisfied Imani 6 months ago. Now she just felt tired. Tired of the corruption and the betrayal and the endless cycle of people choosing power over principles. But she also felt hope. Because for every Theodore Morrison and Derek Hayes, there were people like Sarah Chen who risked their careers to expose the truth. People like Anthony Ricci, Michael Russo, and Thomas Benedetto, who forgave the woman who had wrongly imprisoned them. And people like Alessandro Castellano, who was using his power and resources to build something better than what he had inherited. Change was possible. Justice was possible. Just not the version she had once believed in. As Imani left the courthouse, she found Alessandro waiting for her by his car. He opened the door for her, and she slid into the passenger seat, grateful for his presence, for his steady support, for his love. "It's over," she said as he got in beside her. "Morrison is going to prison. Derek is going to prison. Volkov is going to prison. All the corrupt officials are facing justice. It's finally over." Alessandro took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "No," he said gently. "It's not over. It's just beginning. Because now comes the hard part. Now we have to rebuild. We have to create something better than what came before. We have to prove that people can change, that systems can be reformed, that justice can actually mean something." Imani looked at him, at this man who had started as her enemy, and become her partner, her ally, her love. "You're right," she said. "It is just beginning, and I'm ready for it. We're ready for it. Together." Alessandro smiled and leaned over to kiss her. "Together," he agreed. And as they drove through the streets of New York, past the courthouse where Imani had once believed she was serving justice, past the DA's office where she had been used as a weapon, past all the places where her old life had taken place, Imani felt something she had not felt in months. Peace. Not the peace of certainty, because she had learned that certainty was often an illusion, but the peace of knowing she was on the right path, that she was fighting for something real, that she was loved by someone who challenged her and supported her and made her want to be better. That's the story of Imani Brooks and Alessandro Castellano, the prosecutor and the Mafia boss, the woman who thought she knew what justice meant, and the man who showed her it was more complicated than she ever imagined. Two people from opposite worlds who discovered that sometimes the only way to find real justice is to trust the person you're not supposed to trust, to love the person you're not supposed to love, and to believe that redemption is possible for everyone, even those who seem beyond saving. If this story of enemies who became lovers, of justice found in unexpected places, and of love that transcends impossible boundaries moved you, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. We share new stories every week about people who discovered that sometimes the most complicated relationships are the most meaningful, that love doesn't follow rules, and that justice is more about truth than law. Drop a comment and tell us what you thought of Imani and Alessandro's story. Have you ever had to choose between what you believed was right and what your heart wanted? Would you have worked with your enemy to expose corruption? We would love to hear your perspective. Remember, sometimes the person you think is your enemy is actually your greatest ally, and sometimes love finds you in the most impossible circumstances. Thanks for listening, and we will see you in the next story.